The Mother series has always been a favorite of mine. Growing up in the early 2000s, however, meant that I could never really get my hands on these games or even learn much about them, partly because 2/3 of them were Japanese only, and the only American game came out on the Super Nintendo, which I didn't have. I, like most kids of my generation, were exposed to the classic games by one of two ways, from your parents or from the internet. I have Mr. Chugga Conroy to thank for exposing me to the Mother series. And while I've never spoken to him personally, I would like to say that he has made a very big impact on my life through his Let's Play videos. While I was primarily a big fan of Earthbound on the Super Nintendo, it wasn't until late 2010 did I find out that there was a whole trilogy of games. I tried my hand at playing them, but I was a dumb kid who didn't know how anything worked, so I held off on it. Flash forward to around 2014 when we got Earthbound finally re-released on the Wii U's Virtual Console. First I have to pay respects. I played it, took about 2 months to beat it, and as far as first playthroughs go, I heavily enjoyed it, and would recommend it to literally everyone. It's probably one of my favorite games of all time, and I hold it as like the golden standard for how all RPGs should work. I personally think it's that good. However, I'm not here to babble on about way more successful YouTubers or just better games. I'm here to talk about the little game that started a big series. Back in the 80s, when Nintendo was king and the little Nintendo Entertainment System held a monopoly on the video game market, a small gem shined through the rough. In Japan, anyway. That game went by the name of Mother by Shigesato Itoi. Itoi was a well-known celebrity in Japan, being an actor, a playwright, a musician. Basically anything you could think of, he was. But he wasn't ever a game developer. Itoi approached Nintendo saying he wanted to make a game for the NES, but Nintendo was reluctant at first, seeing how most celebrity-made games didn't turn out too well. Takeshi's Challenge, for example, was not very good. But eventually, he was accepted, after crying for a little bit, and thus, Mother was brought to the public. It turned out to be an enormous success in Japan for breaking a lot of RPG conventions like a fantasy setting and fantasy weapons and fantasy in general, replacing it instead with a more urban American setting. By the time it was famous enough to ship to America, complete with an orchestrated and vocal soundtrack to go with it, the Super Nintendo was about to launch, and the American division of Nintendo didn't want it coming out so close to the end of the NES's lifespan, so it was never brought to America. Skip ahead to like 20 years, and it's 2015 now, I think, and it was finally brought to America for the very first time on the Wii U's Virtual Console, right next to Earthbound. And at the time of me recording this, at the time of this video, the entire trilogy still hasn't come out in America, but hope is still there. But what about Mother 1? Well, fan translations are a thing, and it was dubbed Earthbound Zero here in the West. And while Itoi himself dubbed it Earthbound Beginnings when it came out on the Virtual Console, I'll just still call it by its original name. That's when I heard it first, and that's how a lot of people heard it first. But with all that backstory out of the way, it's time to get into the game itself. The game itself starts out with its own backstory and tells the tale of Maria and George who disappeared back in the early 1900s because of some dark cloud. 80 years later, we're introduced to Ninten, who's sitting at his house when suddenly he's attacked by a lamp. He goes on to save his two sisters from being attacked by a lamp and a doll, and when the doll he starts playing an odd melody, he gets a call from his dad to go into the basement to retrieve his great-grandpa's diary, and is told it's time for him to go on a little adventure. So you leave your family behind and go into town, where apparently zombies are running havoc, a little girl's missing, and the mayor is a coward. So Ninten fiercely goes in the graveyard to save the girl and become the hero of the town. After saving the girl known as Pippi, the mayor gives you a key to the zoo, where you go out and find another one of those melodies that was in the doll. After you go to the zoo, you visit a village of talking canaries and get another melody, a dark cave, a factory, and you visit the magical world known as Magican. Magican is like this Magic Kingdom country kind of thing that's like kind of in the sky, but kind of in the middle of the ocean, because you meet a cat that swims, implying it's in the water, or they're swimming in the sky. Either way, you meet in Magican, there's a castle, and inside the castle you meet Her Majesty Queen Mary, who tells you to gather 8 melodies to help her restore her memory. By that point, because it's so early on in the game, you've already gotten 3 out of the 8 anyway, so you continue on. Once you leave Magicant, you find an elementary school where everyone is talking about some wimp named Lloyd who they just love to pick on. After a nice chat with the janitor who just wants his wife to appreciate him, you meet Lloyd, who's hiding on the roof of the school in a trash can. Lloyd is a white-haired boy in a red shirt with goofy swirly glasses who is apparently a total genius. He accepts your offer of friendship, but he wants a bottle rocket from a nearby factory so that he can clear the train tracks so the story can move on, so that he can prove that he's helpful. You get the bottle rocket, Lloyd joins you, and together the two of you ride into the town of Snowman on a train. There you meet the girl in a church who is named Anna. Anna is missing her mother and is hiding inside the church with her dad because the town is overrun with harshly leveled enemies, so they can't get away. Turns out, the thing that attacked Ninten's house wasn't a poltergeist like how some of the townspeople thought, but instead the work of something much more evil. And whatever it is has been kidnapping the parents of children and attacking people's houses all over America. So you give Anna back her lost hat and she joins you on your quest. After traveling through some more caves, some overrun towns, and a desert, the plot decides to pick back up again when you find Youngtown. Youngtown is like some Lord of the Flies kind of stuff, and it's set up in the middle of the woods and it's run by children. It's guarded with giant wooden spikes, and it's pretty messed up actually. Inside the town is nothing but children, a doctor, and a psychic baby who sings another melody for you and teaches you the power of teleportation. How a baby knows it, I have no idea. Why it's so late in the game, I have also no idea. The kids in the town say they saw aliens take their parents away to the faraway mountain, Mount Itoy. So, along with gathering all 8 melodies, you now have to save the parents of these children. The plot dies again until it's revived by going to the most northern town, and coincidentally the last town of the game, LA. Or Elay, or Ellie, or LA. This is the typical big city setting, contrast to all the smaller towns visited earlier in the game. The streets are overrun by the Blah Blah gang and their leader Teddy. After going to a nightclub and all 3 of your party members perform on stage, Teddy himself appears and picks a fight with you. After about 3 turns, however, he realizes that 1, it's not right to fight kids, and 2, we're tougher than we look and he'd like to join us on an adventure and to have us join his gang, but he realizes that would be bad, so he doesn't ask the second part. Teddy explains that he wants revenge on the aliens because he killed his parents, so after making fun of Lloyd, he joins your party and replaces him as your 3rd member, while Lloyd stays in LA. Teddy joins you, who is the strongest party member. He can basically one-shot every enemy in the game. While Ninten fights with bats, Anna with frying pans, Lloyd with laser guns and all that kind of stuff, Teddy fights with knives and swords with his ultimate weapon being a goddamn samurai sword. With Teddy by your side, you go through a forest and begin the trek up Mount Itoy. There you find the toughest enemies in the game and each character's ultimate weapon. Once you get near the middle of the mountain, you stop by a cabin where you can heal your party because I know how awful it is up there and you're gonna die every 5 seconds. So you're gonna need all the healing you can get. However, unlike most healing houses, this one is special. Once you step inside, Teddy immediately proclaims that he has some phone calls to make and that we should go in the next room. Once inside, Anna declares that she has fallen in love with Ninten after their travels together, and they share a sweet moment where they dance. Dance by NES standards, anyway. This moment is interrupted, however, when a giant robot bursts into the cabin and attacks out of nowhere. It has infinite defense, and no matter what you do, you can't win. It's basically one of those forced losses. But before you die, Lloyd comes back in a tank and blasts the robot to pieces, subsequently blasting Ninten, Anna, and Teddy as well off the side of the mountain. And you're sent back to a doctor's house at the very beginning of the mountain, back in the forest before the entrance. Once you wake up, though, you find Teddy's body on a bed with everyone surrounding him. He asks you to carry on without him and avenge his parents, and he passes out right after that. You can't speak to him anymore in-game. Goodbyes are said, and Lloyd rejoins your party, and together, the 3 of you make it back to where you were, which is even harder now because you don't have Teddy to one-shot most enemies, and continue the mission. Eventually, and I do mean eventually, You'll find an underground lab underneath a lake, devoid of all enemies, but you will meet the robot, Eve, who was built by Ninten's great-great-grandfather, or just great-grandfather, for the purpose of defending Ninten and helping save the world. However, right after you wake her up, the lab explodes and you get washed up on shore. However, Eve still survived the lab explosion, and now towers over you, and you have 4 party members. Something that normally can't happen due to hardware constraints. Well, I suppose Dragon's Quest had 4 party members. Sort of the original Final Fantasy, I think. But it goes into my next point, which is kind of a side point. The cartridge for Earthbound Beginnings, or Earthbound 0, is jam-packed with content more so than most cartridges. Stuff like extra music and all that. Eve can one-shot every single enemy in the game no matter how strong they are, and if I were you, I'd take care to grind some enemies because you will need it. However, all good things must come to an end, as you meet yet another giant robot. This time, however, you can't get hurt in this fight. Eve absorbs all damage for you, and fights as well. While Eve manages to destroy the robot, she's killed in the process. In her dying words, she tells you that she has the 7th melody, and that if you missed any, you have to use them to save the world. She performs the 7th melody for you, and dies right there. Not too long afterwards, you find yourself at the very top of Mount Toy, where Ninten's great-grandfather's tombstone is located. The tombstone has some kind of holographic message inside of it, and tells you that it is indeed Ninten's great-grandfather speaking. He says that he's proud of Ninten, and that he was buried with the final piece of the melody. After he gives it to you, you're transported to Magic Camp for the very last time. There, you know what you have to do, so you meet Queen Mary and perform all 8 melodies. However, once the song is over, all her memories are in fact restored to her, but she realizes that she is in fact Maria, wife of George and great-grandmother to Ninten. She tells of Gigu, the alien that abducted her and George back in the early 1900s. She says how she loved him like her own son and deeply cared for him, and that the 8 melodies you performed were the lullaby she would sing to him as a child, and how he grew to hate the song for some reason. How she became Queen of Magicant is never said, though she wishes luck to Ninten and proclaims that she's finally coming home to George. Magicant crumbles to dust, and soon you're standing in the rubble of her castle. And after that, you're immediately sent back to George's tombstone with no other obstacles in your way. And after going through one more long stretch of cave, you find a room full of weird pods, like some kind of science fiction movie. And inside the pods are every single child's stolen parents, including Anna's. They're all here. Gigu took them all. All that's left is to take on Gigu and save the world. And at the edge of the mountain, Gigu himself and his massive ship appears. And he's right there in front of you, inside his pod. And the battle starts. It's kind of a battle, anyway. All that plays throughout the fight with him is some eerie few notes on loop constantly, and it might get annoying, but definitely sets an atmosphere. During the battle, he tells of how he loved Maria, but couldn't trust George, who had stolen the secrets of his people's power, known as PSI. George apparently betrayed the aliens that kidnapped him against his will as if they were great friends. So obviously, Gigu's really hurt by this. Gigu declared that all of humanity was to suffer and ruin for George's actions, and he left Earth to prepare a battle plan. George somehow managed to return to America, but Maria didn't, and somehow ended up in Magicant. He offers to save Ninten, and only him, from the destruction of humanity. And obviously, that doesn't happen, and Gigu continues to attack the 3 kids. And fighting him does actually nothing. Can't win the fight by actually damage him. It's much better to constantly heal your party and buff up your defense, as his attacks hurt hard. And once his monologue is over, you're presented with a new option that replaces run, which is sing. After performing sing about 11 or 12 times, honestly I lose track, Gigu's defeated and runs off, swearing revenge on Ninten and his whole family. His ship flies away to reveal that he was even bigger than its initial appearance, and he leaves. After that, the credits roll and everything wraps up nicely. Even Teddy is revealed to be alive and well, who now performs frequently at the club in LA. Still hangs out with Ninten on occasion. At the end of the credits, however, an image of a man in a trench coat telephoning his son at night appears. You don't get to see his face, but it's implied that's Ninten's father, informing him that something new has come up. Either take this as Ninten's father, or Ness's father, trying to tell him the events of Earthbound are about to take place. I personally always assume the latter. After you beat the game, you get a nice little cutscene of Ninten finally speaking out loud and taking a well-deserved nap, followed by a cast of characters thing with every sprite and character coming on screen and presenting themselves. But now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of the game, which entails the gameplay and presentation. And this is where it kind of gets bad. Earthbound Zero is obviously an NES game in both looks and sound, and unfortunately, it doesn't hold up that well to other NES games at the time, such as Kirby's Adventure. The colors can look very washed out at times, and unlike its much prettier younger siblings, the battle screens have completely black backgrounds, no color to them whatsoever, which is something the series is recognized for, all the psychedelic backgrounds. But this game doesn't have those. The enemy sprites are in color, at least. Another thing, the order in which you obtain the 8 abilities can vary, because this can quickly turn into one of those where do I go kind of games, if you weren't following a walkthrough. Even I have trouble with this game sometimes, and I must have played like 1,000,000 times. It's really annoying, to be honest. It's also hard to pick up where you left off if you haven't played in a while, because the game gives no context clues when you start it up again. Everyone just says the same thing. Backtracking, that's also an issue. The ability to teleport doesn't come later into the game when you meet that stupid baby, so you have to walk everywhere, which is really annoying, especially when I get to my next point. Random encounters. They're a huge problem. I understand that it came out on the NES, so technology was limited, but there's no form of leeway to these things. They legitimately are the textbook case of random encounters. You can get in a fight seconds after you finish one. There's no leeway. Just like in Pokemon games, turning in place counts as a step. It's not like other games where after you get into a fight, you blink for a little bit to make yourself invincible. No, you can get from battle to battle instantly, no mercy whatsoever. That is, unless you buy the repel ring in Magican, but that wears off. No matter how strong you become, you can still get into encounters with level 1 enemies too. Speaking of enemies, they can totally blindside you if you aren't prepared. Just in the very first town, you can get a game over because all the enemies are random. Not to mention the brutal enemies in the graveyard. Shoutouts to that stupid zombie gang member. At least when you save Pippi, she can level up faster and help you fight. But no, she goes away, so you're stuck being yourself, all alone to fight the zoo and in the Canary Village. Until you get Lloyd, you're all alone to fight these things. Oh, speaking of Lloyd, every time you get a new party member, they start at level 1. You have to grind enemies in Magican or anywhere else to help them level up fast. Oh, and if they die mid-battle or right before you win, too bad, they don't earn any experience points, and you have to go to a hospital, heal them, and do everything all over again. Oh, don't even get me started on Anna, because unlike Paula, who gets better and starts out with really good PSI attacks, Anna is a horrible party member from start to finish. She never gets any better. Not to mention, did you know that her joining you is completely optional? Yeah, it's never said in-game that you have to have her join you. You can just skip Snowman altogether and beat the game with Ninten and Lloyd. Don't even get me started on how much a punch in the dick Mounty Toy is, because basically, it's impossible if all your party members aren't over level 30. Because trust me, you will die a lot. But all those negatives aside, I want to address the positives before I wrap this video up. The music in the game, obviously, is very good, along with the story being very good as well. There are all kinds of just little moments in this game that are very wholesome, such as the fisherman in LA who just wants someone to listen to his fishing stories and fully heals you if you choose to listen to him. Or the janitor in Lloyd's school who you give some kind of semi-therapy to someone who just wants to grow old with his wife. The game is filled with stuff like that, nice little moments. This whole game is nice one big moment, aside from the obvious blemishes anyway. Do I think the game holds up nowadays? I'd say yes if you were in it for the story and music. The gameplay can get tiresome fast, especially if you aren't a fan of RPGs in general. But other than that, I'd say just watch a walkthrough on YouTube. Playing it through in person can get kind of annoying if I can be honest. But still, I really enjoy this game. Would I recommend it? Yes, if you wanted to support the Mother series. No, if you want to actually play it. I just play it on an emulator, honestly. There's actually a great ROM hack out there called Earthbound Zero Fixed. It tunes down enemy difficulty and increases the EXP and money you get from fights, and generally makes the game more playable, actually. But, other than that, that about wraps up the review. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to more reviews. I will be over here in the corner waiting for Mother 3 to come out in the West. It's coming for the Switch any day now. Yeah.